Hey, what's up guys? In the last video, we pulled the M52 out of the E30, got it up on the engine stand. Now the next thing we need to do is get this motor disassembled, get all the accessories off the motor, get the head pulled, and get it ready to get sent off. So the first thing we're going to do is drain all the oil out of this pan. So while that's draining, I'm going to remove this coolant plug on the side of the block just to get any remaining fluid that may be left in there. The last couple of years I've only been running distilled water and one or two things of water wetter. Now that all the fluids are drained from the block, we're going to go ahead and start pulling all the accessories here. Next, we want to loosen the belt. Put 17 on the tensioner, give it a crank, and it will free the belt so you can pull it off. Then we're going to remove all these little brackets. Next, we're going to remove the oil filter housing. Has 5 13mm bolts. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to get this power steering pump removed. And then we'll pull the oil filter housing. We'll remove the water pump. And it's broken. Don't know how long it's been broken for, but I haven't had any cooling issues. So next thing we want to do is work on getting this valve cover off. Normally you'll have two 10mm bolts here, but I just have some zip ties tight enough to use the threads so I can get it on and off quick. Then we'll want to get the coil packs and the coil pack harness off of the valve cover. And don't forget about this ground right here in the middle. It's going to be an 8mm. So now this next step isn't needed at all. For some reason my OCD kicks in. I feel as though I have to number all the coil packs, but it doesn't matter. Now next thing we want to do is remove the valve cover. Around the perimeter of the cover you're going to have 14, 15, 10 millimeter bolts. And don't forget, on the ends there's 2 ground straps held on with 8 millimeter nuts. Now, something to remember with these valve cover bolts is there are 3 pieces. You have the bolt itself, a washer, and a rubber grommet. You want to make sure that you keep these together, or at least remember the orientation for when you order new ones. All the cams look to be good, and there's a little wear on them, but there's no scoring. Now before we do anything to this motor, we need to set it to top dead center. Now to know when you're at top dead center, there's this line here in the timing cover. You want to rotate the motor until this OT line lines right up with it. Right about there. Another good indication to know you're at top dead center is the front lobes on your camshafts will be pointing in at about a 45-degree angle. So now that we got the motor set to top dead center, you're going to want to install your camshaft locking blocks. Now these aren't absolutely needed. There are some ghetto ways that some people will go about doing it, but the tool is so cheap you might as well just get it and do it right. In order for the camshaft blocks to sit flush to the head, you need to remove these 2 rear studs. Now that the motor's at top dead center, you want to install your camshaft locking blocks. It's very important when you do this that you make sure the blocks are sitting flush to the head. Next thing we want to do is remove these 2 access bolts so we can get to the E-Torx heads. Then you want to go ahead and compress this chain tensioner. And in the back here is an access bolt. You can slip an Allen key or a pin through to get slack in the chain. Now the 4 bolts in here are an E10 socket. You're going to want to go ahead and loosen those just so you can have some play in the sprocket itself. Now you want to remove all the hardware from the Vanos. The next thing you want to do is remove this Vanos unit. Now, you're going to need this Vanos removal tool to put it on the sprocket that we loosened and turn it clockwise. As you push it clockwise, you want to pull the Vanos unit straight off. Next, we want to remove all of our hardware so we can get the plates and the sprockets off. Before I go any further, I want to stuff a rag down in here just to prevent anything from falling. So first we have our 4mm plate, spring diaphragm, and our 2mm plate. We'll go ahead and finish removing these Torx bolts. And the plate from that as well. Now before we go ahead and pull this sprocket and chain off, you want to mark the relationship to the chain to the sprocket on both the intake and exhaust side. Just in case at some point you skip a tooth, you'll know exactly where it was. And then go ahead and remove the 2 sprockets while keeping pressure on the chain so you don't skip a tooth. Another common practice to keep them aligned is just put a zip tie between the 2 sprockets. Now that the sprockets are out of the way, we want to remove the upper chain tensioner as well as the chain guide. Then we remove the chain guide, 2 T8 bolts. So next we need to remove the cams. Now before we unbolt them from the head, we need to rotate the motor counterclockwise just to get a little extra clearance from the pistons, so later on when we rotate the cams, won't be any obstructions in the way. The first thing we want to do is mark the chain to sprocket relationship so there's no guesswork when I go to put this back, just like we did on the Vanos unit. Now the most you're going to be able to get is roughly about 16 millimeters of clearance between the pistons and the valves. Now in order to achieve that, you're going to want to put on a 22 millimeter socket and an extension and get this right in the corner of the head to where the engine mount bracket would be, right by the thermostat. And you're going to rotate this counterclockwise till you get to about there, right to the outside of the other corner of the head. From here, what you're going to want to do is remove the primary chain tensioner. This is with a 32 millimeter socket. Now that we have the relationship from the chain to the sprocket marked, you want to go ahead and remove this sprocket. Now, just to prevent the chain from falling into the motor, what we're going to do is place a zip tie on it. You can use a piece of string, anything really. This is just to hold the chain up. Once the sprocket's off, you can go ahead and dangle the chain over the side or let it drop back down into the motor. It doesn't matter as long as you have a method of holding it. So this next step is very critical. Not only are these some of the longest camshafts that are ever made, they're also hollow, which makes them very prone to breaking, so you need to be very careful when removing them. First things that we want to do is remove the camshaft blocks. Now the next step is you want to rotate this camshaft counterclockwise until the lobes for cylinder 1 are pointing straight down. Also, side note, each of these caps are labeled E1 through 7. E is for intake, A is for exhaust. That same marking is also on the end of the camshafts themselves, so you cannot mix up these caps. Now when you rotate this, you don't actually go by number 1 cylinder because they're going to be pointing straight down. It's really hard to get your eyes in there and see a good reference. So what you're going to want to do is rotate the lobes on cylinder 6 so they're pointing straight up in relationship with the cap. It's going to be about right there. Now at this point, cylinder 6 lobes are pointing straight up, cylinder 1 lobes are pointing straight down. So at this point, once you've positioned this camshaft, you're going to go ahead and remove all of the screws from caps E7 through E3. You're going to skip over E2 and go to E1 and remove those. So every cap will be removed except for E2. Skip E2. Now on this last cap, you just want to do each bolt a quarter turn at a time until it's removed. Do not rush through this part. We're going to want to repeat the exact same process for the exhaust cam. And just like before, cylinder number 1, remove the cap, quarter turn at a time. Now there's a couple ways to pull the cam trays and lifters. Some people just pull them out, let the lifters drop, throw them back in. Now I don't want to mix any of them up and have to worry about it. So you can get these pack of earth magnets and put them on each lifter and lay a metal rod across them all and pull them out together, and the lifters will stay intact. And pull the cam trays out, and the lifters stay in place. Now the last thing we need to do is remove all the cylinder head bolts. There is 14 E12 bolts, as well as 2 E8 bolts in the front of the head. And these are going to be on there pretty good, so you're going to want a breaker bar or put an extension on your ratchet. Another little tip, if you want to get the bolts out and don't have a magnet, just use a piece of cloth. Pull them right out. And remove the cylinder head. Now this head gasket here is good. This is an OEM gasket. This motor only has maybe, I don't know, 110,000 miles on it now. And I didn't have to replace the head gasket, but for what I'm gonna want to achieve here, it's definitely a must. And this block doesn't look too bad at all. I mean, there's normal carbon buildup for a 115,000 mile motor. Cross hatching still looks good. I'd say this block is totally fine. Also, something that's very important I thought I would point out to you guys is organization is key, especially if you want things to go smooth during reassembly. Everything I pulled off the motor is all baggied and labeled and nicely put away in this tote, so I don't lose anything. I know exactly where it is and it's easy to find. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. We're gonna get this head sent off to get resurfaced, and we can work on rebuilding the motor and get everything assembled. Thanks for watching. See ya.